A sudden, jagged shadow ripples silently across the glass facade of a downtown skyscraper. On the freeway below, commuters look up as the sun is momentarily blotted out by something gargantuan. The creature glides with terrifying grace, its wingspan wider than the freeway itself. It moves with a speed that defies its prehistoric origins, outpacing the frantic flow of traffic. This is not a solitary wanderer, but the vanguard of a highly organized pack. From a balcony, a witness captures a grainy video of the spear-like beak dipping toward a rooftop. For millions of years, the world thought these rulers of the sky were buried in the dust of the Cretaceous. But today, the Quetzalcoatlus has returned to reclaim its title as the ultimate apex predator. Measuring 12 meters from wingtip to wingtip, it dwarfed every bird known to man. On the ground, it stands nearly 5 meters tall, looking down upon humans with cold, calculating eyes. The sound of its footsteps is a heavy, rhythmic thud that vibrates through the pavement. It scans the urban canyon, searching for anything that moves within the shadows. Suddenly, the pack coordinates a dive toward a crowded central plaza. People scatter in every direction as the prehistoric giants land with thunderous impact. The Quetzalcoatlus uses its long neck to strike with the precision of a lightning bolt. In this new world, our cities have become their hunting grounds. The air is filled with the sound of leathery wings beating against the wind. A police helicopter attempts to intercept, but it is dwarfed by the sheer mass of the beast. With a single swipe of its wing, the creature sends the aircraft spiraling out of control. Humanity's dominance over the skies has been shattered in a matter of hours. How did a creature that vanished 66 million years ago reappear in our time? The answer lies hidden in the darkest corners of the ocean and the hubris of man. As the pack regrouped on the rooftops, their calls echoed through the empty streets like prehistoric trumpets. Emergency sirens wailed, but they were drowned out by the sheer power of the ancient reptiles. This was no longer our city, it was their nesting ground. Every movement on the ground was now a potential death sentence. A small group of survivors huddled inside a subway entrance, watching the shadows pass above. The Quetzalcoatlus walked past the grate, its giant legs looking like organic pillars. It could smell the fear radiating from the concrete below. With a sudden motion, it thrust its beak through the bars, seeking out its prey. This was just the beginning of a nightmare that would span continents. They were not just animals, they were a biological force of nature returning after an epoch of absence. The sheer efficiency of their hunting patterns suggested a high level of intelligence. Humanity scrambled to find a defense, but how do you stop a creature that rules the air? Every radar ping confirmed more arrivals, more shadows, more death. The Quetzalcoatlus moved with the confidence of a king returning to his throne. Its golden eyes surveyed the wreckage of the night before. It had found a world of soft, slow-moving mammals, and it was hungry. As the sun rose, the true scale of the infestation became clear. But as the military prepared to strike back, they realized the creatures were already one step ahead of them. To understand the threat in our skies, we must first dissect the anatomy of this biological marvel. The Quetzalcoatlus northropi was not a dinosaur, but the absolute pinnacle of the pterosaur lineage. When it stood on the ground, its height reached a staggering 5 meters. This stature places its eye level directly in line with that of a modern giraffe. The most striking feature is the massive spear-like beak. Measuring between 2 and 2.5 meters, this beak functions as a lethal lance. Its neck was composed of elongated vertebrae, providing a stiff but powerful reach. This allowed the predator to strike targets on the ground from a terrifying distance. Despite its size, the creature's bones were hollow and filled with air sacs. This biological engineering kept its weight around 250 kilograms. This lightweight was essential for its most incredible feat, flight. To take off, it utilized a quadrupedal launch, vaulting itself into the air with powerful wing muscles. With a single flap, it could reach the altitude needed to catch thermal currents. Its wings were not feathered, but composed of a tough, leathery membrane. A fine coat of hair-like fibers called pycnofibers covered its torso for insulation. This suggests a warm-blooded metabolism, allowing it to remain active in cooler climates. Its brain was highly developed for balance and visual processing. From kilometers above, it could spot a small animal moving in the tall grass. Once a target was identified, it would descend in a silent, controlled glide. Upon landing, it transformed back into a terrestrial stalker. It moved with a disturbing, jerky gait reminiscent of a giant vampire bat. Each step was nearly silent despite the creature's immense size. It did not chew its food, it swallowed it whole using a powerful throat. Anything smaller than a meter was simply fuel for its high-energy needs. Biomechanical studies show its beak could exert enough force to crush bone and metal. The neck muscles were thick enough to resist the shock of high-impact strikes. This allowed the Quetzalcoatlus to hunt dangerous prey without risking injury. Its respiratory system worked in a one-way loop, much like modern birds. This provided a constant supply of oxygen even during the most strenuous flight. The eyes were positioned laterally, giving it a near-panoramic view of its surroundings. To look directly at something, it had to turn its massive head with robotic precision. Its wing fingers were incredibly long, supporting the main flight membrane. The remaining 3 fingers on each hand were clawed and functional for climbing. Everything about its build was optimized for a world that no longer exists. It was an apex predator designed to dominate the late Cretaceous landscape. Yet here it is, its ancient design functioning perfectly in our concrete jungles. How could such a massive, specialized creature survive the total collapse of its world? The answer lies not in the present, but in a catastrophic event 66 million years ago. While the rest of its kind faced total annihilation, one small group found a way to cheat death. The late Cretaceous period came to a violent and sudden end when the Chicxulub asteroid slammed into the Earth. This impact incinerated vast forests and sent towering tsunamis racing across the North and South American coastlines. Billions of tons of dust and gas were blasted into the atmosphere, choking out the life-giving sun. A long, dark winter followed, causing temperatures to plummet and global ecosystems to crater. However, on the farthest side of the planet, the shock waves and inferno arrived with less ferocity. Deep in the Indian Ocean, a remote island served as a sanctuary for a few lucky survivors. This island, similar to what we now know as Christmas Island, provided a unique microclimate. A small family of Quetzalcoatlus huddles together on the rocky outcrops, watching the skies change color. These creatures were terrestrial stalkers, well suited to finding food on the ground even when the skies were dark. They discovered a bounty of nutritious crabs and fish along the coral reefs that surrounded their home. While the rest of the world's megafauna perished, these pterosaurs adapted to the shifting temperatures over millions of years. Their isolation was their greatest strength, keeping them safe from the rise and fall of other mainland species. For 66 million years, the population quietly rebuilt itself in complete secrecy. They evolved to handle the changing oxygen levels of the Cenozoic era, becoming leaner and more efficient. They became masters of their domain, ruling the island skies without ever needing to venture to the distant mainland. The island remained unspotted by human eyes until the 1600s, leaving the creatures undisturbed for epochs. Even as humans eventually settled nearby islands, the Island of Giants remained a place of myth and legend. Sailors told stories of massive shadows that could pluck a man from a deck, though few believed them. These flying behemoths were not just survivors, they were the guardians of a lost world. Their biology had remained remarkably stable, a testament to the perfection of their apex design. The abundance of red crabs on the island provided a steady stream of protein that supported their massive size. But as the 19th century dawned, human curiosity began to bridge the gap between myth and reality. The first explorers to land on the island were greeted by a sight that defied all scientific understanding. The sheer scale of the creatures caused immediate panic among the landing parties. One brave naturalist managed to sketch the creature before fleeing back to the main ship. Reports of living fossils reached the mainland, sparking a frenzy among zoos and private collectors. The race was on to capture a specimen and bring it back to civilization for profit and fame. The first capture missions were disastrous, as the pterosaurs defended their territory with lethal precision. The spear-like beaks could pierce through wood and bone with ease, leaving the explorers defenseless. Eventually, using heavy nets and tranquilizers, a few individuals were successfully subdued. These magnificent kings of the air were hoisted onto ships, bound and blinded by heavy hoods. They were transported thousands of miles away from their ancestral home to become spectacles for the masses. Scientists studied them in captivity, marveling at how a creature from the Cretaceous could still breathe modern air. They were kept in enclosures with low ceilings to prevent them from taking flight and escaping. For decades, the world viewed them as nothing more than biological curiosities, much like the giraffe or the elephant. But the raw power of an apex predator cannot be contained by iron bars forever. Rumors began to surface of individual escapes in remote parts of Australia and New Guinea. These reports were largely dismissed by the public as misidentifications of large birds or planes. The true danger lay in the fact that these creatures were far more intelligent and adaptable than anyone realized. While a few captives languished in zoos, a new and far more dangerous player was about to enter the story. The first expedition teams landed on the jagged shores of Christmas Island with heavy hearts and loaded tranquilizer rifles. They moved through the thick ferns, tracking the massive three-toed footprints that pressed deep into the mud. High above, the canopy groaned as a shadow the size of a light aircraft drifted silently across the sun. The lead hunter signaled for silence when he spotted a nesting pair perched on a limestone cliff. The creatures stood motionless, their giraffe-like necks swaying slowly as they scanned the horizon for prey. A pressurized dart hissed through the air, striking the larger male in its muscular thigh. The beast let out a piercing, prehistoric shriek that echoed across the entire island. It took 12 men and heavy-duty steel cables to secure the sedated giant before it could tumble into the sea. Within weeks, The first captive Quetzalcoatlus was hoisted into a custom-built shipping container. The creature's enormous wings were bound tightly against its body to prevent it from thrashing during the voyage. News of the living dragon spread across the globe like wildfire, sparking a frenzy of public interest. Billionaires and zoo directors engaged in a bidding war for the right to exhibit the first prehistoric Skylord. The London Zoo unveiled a massive geodesic dome specifically designed to hold the specimen. Thousands of people stood in line for hours just to catch a glimpse of the spear-headed titan. Inside the dome, the Quetzalcoatlus paced the perimeter, its beak clicking rhythmically against the glass. Zookeepers soon realized that the creature's metabolic needs were staggering, requiring hundreds of pounds of fresh meat daily. During a feeding session in Berlin, the animal nearly snapped a keeper's arm off with a lightning-fast strike. It became clear that these were not docile giants, but highly intelligent, frustrated predators. Seeing the success of zoos, traveling circuses began to acquire smaller, younger specimens for their road shows. These sky screamers were kept in cramped mobile cages that barely allowed them to stand upright. To keep them from flying away during performances, handlers would often clip their primary wing membranes. Under the big top, the creatures were forced to hop through rings of fire for the amusement of screaming crowds. The majestic flyers of the Cretaceous were reduced to mere caricatures of their former glory. Animal rights activists began to protest the prehistoric slavery occurring across the civilized world. However, the massive profits generated by the exhibits kept the cages locked tight. In a small zoo in Oklahoma, a freak storm damaged the structural integrity of the main aviary. The Quetzalcoatlus inside sensed the weakness and slammed its 200-kilogram body against the fraying wires. With a final explosive heave, the beast burst through the perimeter and into the night sky. It didn't take long for the escapee to find its first meal in the nearby suburban neighborhood. A golden retriever was snatched from a backyard in seconds, leaving only a broken chain behind. Local police were helpless against a predator that could strike from the clouds and vanish before they could aim. This single escape was a harbinger of the chaos that would soon follow as more institutions failed. Governments began to realize that the zoo solution was merely a ticking time bomb. In Japan, an experimental tracking chip was implanted in a captive female to study its flight patterns. The data showed the creature was capable of reaching speeds of 100 kilometers per hour in a dive. The cost of containment began to outweigh the revenue, leading many smaller circuses to abandon their animals in the wild. These abandoned creatures, traumatized by captivity, became the most aggressive of all. They no longer feared humans, they viewed them as the source of their pain and their next meal. While the world struggled with these scattered incidents, a shadow was growing in the South. A private shipment of 8 healthy specimens was currently heading to a secret estate in Colombia, commissioned by a man who didn't care for zoo regulations. The transport plane touched down on a hidden dirt strip deep within the Colombian jungle. Armed men waited in the shadows of the trees as the cargo bay doors slowly hissed open. Inside the dark fuselage, 8 massive wooden crates rattled with the weight of living prehistoric giants. Pablo Escobar watched from his jeep, a man accustomed to owning the impossible. He had seen photos of these sky monsters and decided they would be the crown jewels of Hacienda Nápoles. Forklifts struggled to move the heavy boxes onto flatbed trucks destined for the private zoo. A low guttural hiss vibrated through the wood of the lead crate, silencing the nearby cicadas. The drug lord envisioned 4 breeding pairs dominating the skies above his vast estate. Upon arrival, the creatures were forced into high-walled enclosures designed for elephants, not flyers. For a few years, they remained a secret curiosity for the billionaire's inner circle. The tropical Colombian climate mirrored the warmth of their ancient Cretaceous home perfectly. However, the power of the Medellin cartel began to crumble under international pressure. In 1993, paramilitary forces stormed the compound, leaving the estate in total disarray. Guards fled the scene, leaving the gates of the exotic animal pens unlocked and unmanned. A male Quetzalcoatlus sensed the lack of resistance and lunged at the weakened fence. With a massive push, the spear-beaked giant broke into the open courtyard. It let out a piercing shriek that summoned the other captives from their cells. The four breeding pairs gathered, their 12-meter wingspans casting long shadows over the abandoned pools. To take flight, the first creature performed a powerful vault into the air with its quadrupedal launch. It flapped its leathery wings twice before catching a rising thermal from the heat of the valley. One by one, the other 7 giants followed, circling the estate like vultures of a forgotten age. They headed toward the deep cover of the Amazon basin where humanity's reach was limited. Deep in the jungle, they found a territory rich with prey and devoid of cages. A female spotted a family of capybaras near a riverbank and began her silent descent. With a single strike of her spear-like beak, she secured their first wild meal in years. The abundance of high-protein food sources triggered a rapid breeding cycle within the group. Unlike their slow growth on Christmas Island, the South American environment accelerated their population boom. Within months, the original 8 had become the founders of an invisible empire. Local indigenous tribes began reporting giant bats that could carry off a caiman. For a long time, the world ignored these accounts as mere folklore from the remote interior. The creatures began to follow the rivers, moving closer to the edges of human civilization. They found that human livestock was far easier to hunt than elusive jungle animals. A farmer in the Meta Department was the first to find his entire goat herd slaughtered without a trace of the predator. The puncture wounds in the animals' chests were unlike any feline or canine attack. Word of the Cretaceous invaders began to spread through the rural villages of South America. The Quetzalcoatlus population had grown from 8 to nearly 50 in just a few years. They were no longer confined to the Colombian rainforest, they were crossing borders. The giants were becoming bolder, often seen perched on the roofs of remote barns during the day. Humanity's dominance over the Americas was about to face its first aerial challenger in eons. As a young boy in a suburban backyard in Brazil played with his dog, a shadow larger than a plane began to circle overhead. The shadow over the Brazilian backyard was merely the first sign of a continental shift. From the depths of the Colombian rainforest, the 4 original breeding pairs found an environment perfectly suited to their ancient needs. These creatures are warm-blooded and insulated with hair-like fibers, allowing them to thrive in varied climates. Within months, sightings were reported as far south as the Argentine Pampas and as far north as the Mexican deserts. The first real victims of this expansion were not humans, but the massive herds of livestock that dot the countryside. For a predator that once hunted baby dinosaurs, a grazing cow is nothing more than a slow-moving buffet. A single strike from their spear-like beak can penetrate the thickest hide instantly. Ranchers in Uruguay reported finding hundreds of sheep decimated in a single night of terror. The efficiency of their hunting packs suggests a level of social coordination humans never anticipated. Traditional fences and guard dogs proved completely useless against an airborne threat of this magnitude. Farmers describe a harrowing silence that falls over the land just before the giants descend. In rural Peru, a transport truck was forced off the road by a creature attempting to snatch goats from the trailer. The economic toll on South American agriculture began to trigger a global food crisis. Biologists noted that the infinite protein from farm animals allowed the species to reproduce at an accelerated rate. Their territory was no longer limited to the tropics. They began to follow migratory bird routes north. Florida's Everglades became the next stronghold for these prehistoric invaders. Local alligators, once the undisputed kings of the swamp, found themselves being snatched up as mere snacks. The expansion was so rapid that satellite tracking could barely keep up with the shifting front lines. Nature was reclaiming the continent, and it was doing so with a size and ferocity humans weren't prepared for. Small towns began to implement mandatory curfews to avoid the dusk hunting hours. In Texas, a small aircraft narrowly avoided a mid-air collision with a creature that refused to yield the sky. The beasts were becoming bolder, no longer satisfied with remote pastures. They began to recognize the sounds of human activity as a dinner bell. Reports of missing pets in suburban areas skyrocketed, leaving families devastated and terrified. Civil authorities struggled to classify the threat, unsure if this was an ecological disaster or an act of war. As the creatures reached the outskirts of major urban centers, the true horror of their adaptability became clear. They are not just mindless animals, they are calculated stalkers of the earth. Entire regions in the Midwest became no-fly zones for both birds and drones. The Quetzalcoatlus population had reached a tipping point, outgrowing the resources of the wild. Hunger was driving them toward the most densely populated areas of the planet. The once majestic sight of a prehistoric survivor was now a symbol of impending doom. Experts warned that the creatures had no natural predators in the modern world to check their growth. Every open space, from parks to school playgrounds, was now a potential kill zone. The giants had learned that humans were small, soft, and gathered in predictable locations. Across the United States, emergency sirens began to sound for something other than tornadoes. The era of human dominance was being challenged by a ghost from the Cretaceous. Panic began to outpace the creature's flight speed as news reports went global. In a matter of weeks, the Americas had become a hunting ground for a species that refused to stay extinct. But the true horror was only just beginning as the giants looked toward the lights of the great cities. As the first creature landed on a Los Angeles rooftop, its 12-meter wingspan began to unfold, blocking out the neon lights above a crowded street below. The massive shadow of the lead Quetzalcoatlus glides silently over the shimmering glass facades of downtown Los Angeles skyscrapers. High above the gridlock of the 405 freeway, a pack of these aerial titans circles with the cold, calculating precision of storks. Pedestrians stop in their tracks, necks craned upward as the sun is momentarily eclipsed by leathery wings spanning 40 feet. One creature tilts its massive neck, eyeing the bustling movement of a public dog park nestled between the concrete towers. A golden retriever barks frantically at the sky as the giraffe-sized reptile begins a steep, controlled descent. With a thunderous flap that rattles nearby apartment windows, the beast lands on all fours, towering over the frantic pets. Its 2-meter-long spear-like beak snaps forward with lightning speed, snatching a small terrier before the owner can even scream. Panic erupts across the park as people realize their beloved companions have become nothing more than high-protein snacks. This is no longer a freak occurrence. The Quetzalcoatlus has identified the city as its new primary hunting ground. Biologists note that the creatures are specifically targeting prey in the 9 to 13 kilogram weight range. For the reptiles, there is no moral distinction between a stray raccoon and a family's expensive purebred cat. Throughout the suburbs of Miami, residents find their backyards littered with the remains of the easy buffet provided by domestic life. The most chilling realization comes when a Quetzalcoatlus is spotted peering through a second-story nursery window. Humanity's youngest and most vulnerable are now within the strike zone of an apex predator from 66 million years ago. On the rooftops of Manhattan, the pterosaurs establish nesting sites, using the heights to scout for movement in the canyons below. City governments scramble to issue aerial threat alerts, advising citizens to avoid open parks and rooftops. Public infrastructure is not designed for flying giants, and the sheer weight of these creatures causes power lines to snap and balconies to collapse. Then there's the matter of the biological waste, as the massive reptiles drop enormous loads of acidic guano over cars and pedestrians. When a brave police officer attempts to shoo a creature away from a playground, it stands its ground and emits a bone-chilling hiss. The officer's handgun proves useless against the thick, fibrous hide of a creature that once shared the earth with Tyrannosaurus rex. The silence of the city's parks is now a sign of fear rather than peace. In a quiet residential neighborhood of San Diego, an elementary school goes into full lockdown as 3 creatures land on the gymnasium roof. Inside, teachers pull down the blinds, their hands shaking as they hear the rhythmic clack-clack of prehistoric beaks against the glass. These creatures aren't just scavengers, they are highly efficient terrestrial stalkers that have adapted to the verticality of modern architecture. They use the updrafts from city heat to stay aloft for hours, watching for any sign of a small mammal appearing in the open. A news helicopter capturing live footage of a hunt is nearly swiped out of the sky by a territorial male protecting its new urban perch. The video goes viral instantly, showing the world the terrifying reality of life under the shadow of the giants. As night falls, the creatures don't stop. Their superior vision allows them to hunt by the light of street lamps and neon signs. Emergency services are overwhelmed with reports of sky dragons breaking into penthouses and rooftop gardens. The human population begins to realize that the apex predator has truly returned, and we are no longer at the top of the food chain. The breeding pairs Escobar released have created a population surge that the modern world is unprepared to contain. In Chicago, a group of Quetzalcoatlus has taken up residence on the bean using the reflective surface to dazzle their prey. Every time a pigeon is caught, the crowds who used to feed them scatter in a spray of feathers and prehistoric screeching. The infrastructure of the city, from its trash cans to its park benches, is being repurposed as perches and nesting material. But the most terrifying shift occurs when a pack of these monsters learns to cooperate, cornering a group of commuters at an outdoor train platform. The people huddle together, realizing that their phones and briefcases are no defense against these living spears. Military analysts warn that if the urban expansion continues, major cities may become uninhabitable within months. The creatures are not just visiting. They are claiming the concrete jungle as their own Cretaceous territory. One evening, a massive alpha male lands on the roof of a suburban daycare center, its weight causing the ceiling tiles to groan. As the creature tilts its head and looks through the skylight at the children below, a low, guttural growl vibrates through the entire building, signaling the start of a tragedy that will change the human-reptile war forever. The guttural growls of the Quetzalcoatlus outside the school windows signaled a tragedy that finally broke humanity's patience. News of the urban attack spread like wildfire across global networks, igniting a primal survival instinct in the human population. Governments realized that ethical sterilization and passive containment had utterly failed to protect the most vulnerable. For the first time in history, every nation on Earth agreed to a singular, relentless objective: the total reclamation of the skies. The military response was swift and uncompromising, turning urban landscapes into high-tech hunting grounds. Specialized sky sweep units were formed, equipped with heat-seeking technology to track the warm-blooded reptiles through the clouds. Attack helicopters swarmed the canyons of major cities, engaging the massive creatures in terrifying dogfights among the spires. Tracer rounds lit up the night sky as the apex predators of two different eras clashed for dominance. The Quetzalcoatlus, used to being the undisputed masters of the air, found themselves outmatched by human engineering. Many of the majestic creatures fell from the sky, their prehistoric reign ending on the cold asphalt of modern streets. Humanity did not stop at the cities. They pushed the hunt into the deep Amazonian rainforests where the breeding pairs hid. Specialized teams used acoustic lures that mimicked the mating calls of the creatures to draw them into the open. One by one, the nests were located, and the invasive population was systematically dismantled. The tide of the war turned as the creatures began to flee the mainland, instinctively heading back toward the Indian Ocean.
Rather than total extinction, the Global Biosecurity Council proposed a final, permanent solution.
The survivors would be herded back to Christmas Island, their original refuge from the Cretaceous extinction. A massive maritime blockade was established around the island to ensure no creature could ever leave again. Automated laser towers and sonic emitters were installed along the island's perimeter to repel any attempt at flight toward the mainland. Slowly, the fear that had gripped the world's urban centers began to dissipate as the skies grew quiet once more. Children returned to playgrounds, and farmers no longer scanned the horizon for giraffe-sized shadows. On Christmas Island, the Quetzalcoatlus returned to their ancient ways, hunting crabs and fish in the reefs. Without the easy protein of human livestock, their population stabilized to match the island's natural resources. Researchers now monitor the species from orbit, studying the last living remnants of the Cretaceous period from a safe distance. The world had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of bringing the deep past into the volatile present. The legend of Pablo Escobar's flying terrors became a dark chapter in history books, a cautionary tale of hubris. The island sanctuary became a world of its own, a prehistoric bubble protected by modern steel. Humanity had proven itself as the new apex predator, not through physical size, but through collective will and technology. A new equilibrium was reached where nature and civilization could coexist as long as a vast ocean remained between them. The scars on the cities began to heal, with new architecture designed to be sky-safe just in case. We look to the skies now with a different kind of awe, knowing what once hunted there and what might one day return. The great wings that once blocked out the sun now only cast shadows over the red crabs of a lonely island. The interspecies war was over, and for the first time in millions of years, the world felt truly in balance. Every year, a single expedition of scientists is allowed to land on the island to check on the health of the flock. They report that the Quetzalcoatlus have reverted to their prehistoric social structures, undisturbed by the modern world. Perhaps in their isolation, they can continue to exist as a living library of a lost era. As the sun sets over Christmas Island, the giant reptiles take flight one last time for the evening, safe within their borders. The terror of the return has passed, replaced by a quiet respect for the ancient giants of the sky. The cities are bright, the farms are quiet, and the prehistoric nightmare has finally been put to rest. We are the masters of our domain, but we share it with the ghosts of the past, now kept exactly where they belong. The story of the Quetzalcoatlus in the modern world ends here, a reminder that some things are meant to stay in the history of the Earth.